Imagine a world where your daily habits, your split-second decisions, and even your emotions are completely analyzed in real time. We're talking about a reality where artificial intelligence has gotten so incredibly advanced that it can actually predict your next move before you even make it. It knows what you're going to do before the conscious thought even crosses your mind. Now, on one hand, this kind of immense power could theoretically stop crimes in their tracks and drastically improve public safety. But on the flip side, it casts a seriously eerie shadow over our privacy and our personal freedom. If our entire lives are perfectly mapped out by an algorithm, it kind of feels like we humans might lose that spark of being unpredictable and unique, right? Welcome to this explainer on the predictive AI dilemma. And that brings us right to the absolute core question we're unpacking today. If an algorithm can flawlessly forecast your every single action, are your choices actually yours? We're honestly standing right on the edge of a profound dilemma here. It's one that completely forces us to question our deepest sense of autonomy and free will when faced with these hyper-advanced predictive data models. Let's get into it.
Okay, Section 1, Fiction Becomes Predictive Reality.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To really understand how we got here, we've got to trace a pretty fascinating narrative arc. It takes us from a classic 1956 sci-fi concept straight into the wildly complex technological reality we're living in today. Think back to Philip K. Dick's legendary story, The Minority Report. In that fictional world, mutated humans called precogs use psychic abilities to literally foresee murders before they happen. Well, fast forward to right now, and we've basically traded those psychic mutants for modern predictive analytics. Machine learning algorithms, which are trained on just massive oceans of big data, are forecasting our behavior with startling accuracy. No psychic powers needed. So in Dick's story, the pre-crime police commissioner, John Anderton, is actually predicted by these precogs to murder a man he's literally never even met. It's a brilliant setup because it highlights this massive philosophical tension. You have the ultimate conflict between societal safety, stopping crimes before they happen, and individual liberty, where someone gets punished for a future they haven't actually lived out yet. And the wild part? Today, we're not just reading about this in a paperback, we are actively grappling with real-world systems that are attempting this exact kind of preemptive justice. Moving on to Section 2, Harvesting Your Irrational Choices. So how exactly does modern AI actually manage to predict what we're going to do? Like I said, it's not magic, and it's definitely not psychic. Instead, it's totally rooted in the constant, invisible harvesting of our daily data. This whole dynamic relies on a concept that scholar Shoshana Zuboff famously calls surveillance capitalism. Basically, it's the continuous collection of our lived human experience. Every single click, your GPS location, how long you linger on a post, it's all scooped up to create what are called prediction products. These products are then sold on behavioral futures markets to buyers who really want to know and ultimately influence what you're going to do next. We are continuously generating this sort of shadow text of behavioral surplus, and it is secretly being leveraged for massive profit by major platform owners. And honestly, they're getting incredibly clever about how they predict our moves. Just recently, researchers at MIT and the University of Washington showcased this through something called a latent inference budget model. Here's how it works. First, the AI observes our suboptimal or irrational decisions. Then, it identifies our human computational constraints. Basically, things like us just being short on time. Because let's face it, we don't spend hours analyzing every single micro choice we make in a day, right? We naturally rely on fast, flawed shortcuts. The AI actually tracks those exact irrational, time-constrained patterns to figure out what we'll do next. It literally predicts us by studying our mistakes. How wild is that? Which brings us to Section 3, Creating Accuracy and Forcing Outcomes. Now, if AI merely observed us passively from a distance, that would be one thing. But we need to introduce a pretty terrifying twist here. Algorithmic prediction isn't just passive observation anymore. It can actually manipulate and outright force an outcome to happen. We can see this super clearly in researcher Kirsten Martin's model of treatment effects. Look, when an algorithm slaps a positive label on someone, say predicting they're going to commit a crime or cheat on a test, that person is then subjected to a specific treatment. That might look like intense police surveillance or hyper-strict proctoring software tracking their eyes. And what this reveals is that the treatment itself can trigger the predicted outcome. The algorithm is essentially creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, which completely obscures whether its prediction was actually accurate in the first place. This creates an incredibly dangerous dynamic, especially when we talk about true positives in a predictive result matrix. Just imagine an organization that aggressively overlabels individuals as high risks, or says they require some kind of extreme intervention. The organization ends up looking super accurate and highly efficient when they inevitably catch someone or confirm their own bias. Win-win for them, right? But the real-world cost is entirely borne by the subject. That person is arbitrarily labeled and forced into a severely penalizing environment. The AI didn't just passively predict reality, it artificially manufactured the accuracy by shoving a human being into a highly scrutinized box. To really anchor this complex theory, we have to look at the visceral, genuinely tragic true story of Robert McDaniel in Chicago. An algorithm built by the Chicago Police Department predicted that McDaniel would be involved in a shooting. And because of this specific predictive label, the police subjected him to constant, highly visible surveillance. But here's the devastating part. This increased police attention made his neighbors mistakenly believe he was a police informant. Consequently, McDaniel, who literally had no violent history, was shot twice by people in his own neighborhood. The algorithm's label pushed him into a deadly, penalizing treatment that ultimately caused the exact predicted outcome. Sure, the algorithm appeared accurate on paper, but the human cost was just devastating. Let's look at Section 4, the death of free will. This tragic reality forces us right into a philosophical climax. What actually happens to our unique human autonomy when we are just constantly mapped, categorized, and nudged by AI? Are we literally witnessing the death of free will? Futurist Garrett Lienhard frames this beautifully. He says, and I quote, "Efficient outcomes are not always ethical ones. In fact, they usually are not. A prediction model can be perfectly optimized. It can be ruthlessly efficient at grouping us into tidy little categories. But treating complex human beings as mere statistical data points completely strips away our dignity and our individuality." What we are watching right now is a massive head-on collision between traditional free will and a brand new algorithmic determinism. Historically, we think of free will as autonomy and self-mastery. It's what the famous psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls System 2 thinking. That's slow, deliberate, conscious processing where you really weigh your options. But predictive analytics, they bypass that entirely. They exploit our System 1 thinking. Those are our fast, automatic, totally non-conscious responses. When algorithms specifically target this automatic layer, they just completely sidestep our rational deliberation. It's almost like our brains are being hacked. And this leads to a phenomenon that Professor Karen Young calls hypernudging. Basically, it's an entire ecosystem of continuous persuasion, completely powered by real-time data. It doesn't just anticipate what you might like, it actively scripts your choices. Think about it. Think about how a social media feed subtly shifts the emotional tone of the videos it feeds you just to keep you scrolling a little bit longer. It dynamically shapes the digital environment to mold your behaviors before your conscious, deliberate awareness even has a chance to step in and say, wait a minute. It is algorithmic governmentality, plain and simple, shaping the very conditions under which your own free will is formed. Finally, Section 5, protecting your cognitive liberty. So with all of this happening, how do we fight back? How do we protect our minds in an era where human thinking and machine algorithms are fundamentally co-evolving? Well, for centuries, the legal concept of habeas corpus has protected our physical bodies from unlawful detention, right? But today, legal and ethical scholars are saying we need something more. They're proposing a brand new fundamental human right called habeas cogitationem. Basically, this is the absolute right to mental privacy, to cognitive liberty, and the protection of our own psychological integrity against algorithmic intrusion. We urgently needed to legally recognize that we have a fundamental right to our own thoughts, totally free from hidden real-time manipulation. But protecting our autonomy is going to require some real, actionable steps. First off, we've got to redesign our digital environments to be plastic and empowering, rather than rigid and manipulative. We also need robust ethical AI governance to actually keep the power of massive platform owners in check. And we definitely have to avoid specification gaming. That's a fancy way of saying we can't let AI ruthlessly optimize for a single metric, like maximizing user engagement, while completely tossing human well-being out the window. We absolutely must keep human judgment in the loop, making sure real people assess cases on their individual merits, rather than just treating someone as a statistical data point. And finally, we have to apply the precautionary principle. If an AI poses far-reaching risks to our human agency, the burden of proof has to fall squarely on the people deploying it to prove that it's safe. Period. We have seen today just how easily predictive analytics can slip from simply observing our behavior to outright dictating it. From the fictional mutants of Minority Report to the very real, very tragic story of Robert McDaniel, the ethical labyrinth here is just massive. Moving forward, we really need to shift our focus away from just pure technological efficiency and start prioritizing the preservation of human dignity. So, as you go about your day, scrolling and clicking, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought. Think about your own daily digital choices and ask yourself,